Somebody asked a while back, about 2 months ago, about using materials, the main.materials.json instead of materials.cs, how to use the newer way and not the older way. The easiest thing to do to fully understand how those files are written is to make a new texture like test123, for example. Put an image into every single one of them. It doesn't matter what image you put in there, and just enable all these little check boxes and all these little animation boxes and all these reflections and all this stuff, and then say save the material. So this is the one that it just saved over here. So you can see how it writes all the stuff. And if you did not want to use version 1.5, the PBR materials, and you wanted to see how, now you wouldn't want all these things checked off for a texture. I'm just showing you how you can make the game write the file so you can see how it's written. Because also you wouldn't want these damn directories in here anyway. You would want all these removed if you're making like a mesh and you want to share it between your different levels. Then you can't have this stuff in here or it won't work. But I'm not removing all of them. But that's just that's what the game engine will do after you edit a texture that you create. Now, if you revert back to 1.0 and you save all this stuff, and to make a slight change to make it give me the option to save it again. Now going back into here, you'll see this is the old non 1.5 way of how it writes everything. Alright, so we're on the industrial map, and you see this cube. If you want to be able to share things between levels without having to remake the textures, then this is the way you would need to have the folder set up. Inside the levels art folder, you see there's this test22 folder. Inside of here is a main.materials, a mesh, and the image that goes with the texture. If we open this file here, you'll see the name of the texture. But what's important to note is that there is no directory for where the color map is. This is actually correct. This is the way it's supposed to be. There should not be a directory telling you where that texture is. That makes it so that you can take this folder, copy, and just go to a different level entirely, like small grid, for example, paste it, load small grid, and that item will also work in small grid now. You don't have to make any adjustments to anything. You just move the folder. It's that simple. Just like that. That's how easy it is to move stuff if you're making your own things in Blender that you want to share between levels. Now, one thing to note, this test22 cube I made, if you decided to give it a texture inside of Blender, I don't know, let me find something quick on the desktop to slap on it, just anything. How about this bark? When we export this to whatever level we're going to put it in, we make sure we put it in a separate folder in like the levels art folder, for example, like small grid art test22. We'll overwrite this with the new, it's got the new texture. You'd see how copy is texture options copy. That means when you export, it's going to put that texture in there with it. It's going to go in there with it. See, there's the bark. However, to get it to work in here, you got to put it in there. Now if we load small grid, we'll reload the level so we don't screw up anything. The game likes to crash a lot when you injecting things like that into it when it's running. It doesn't always, but it does a lot. Enough that I just reload the level every time just to avoid it happening, and it still happens sometimes. So there's the bark. And you see, not one time did I go up in here in a material editor and fool with any of these textures. Now here's the thing, if you do decide, okay, I want to edit that texture from this thing, and I wanted to give it something different, well, let me stick a texture in there that is different. How about this particular picture here? We'll go to levels, small grid, art, and we'll even put it in the correct folder that it's supposed to go in if we want to use it as a texture. But here's the thing, if the game assigns it, like now I let the game assign a texture to it like this and I save it, then what it's going to do, it's going to write onto your main.materials. It's going to add that directory location, which it does not need. So you just simply remove it, save the file, and now this is ready to be transported into any other level. Now the way I used to make textures is if I knew I was making this box in Blender, for example, and I knew its texture was test 23, for example, and I had this bark on it, and I want to export this as a collider into my level, which in this particular case is small grid. We'll call this one test 23, the mesh. And we'll export it. Now we know this is a different texture name. So if we import it in from here, it's going to be red. To have gotten around that, what I would have had to done is create the new material in here first. Is that what I called it? Let's be sure. Test 23. Yes, that is what it's called. Create. And we'll just manually select the color map. Save. It will not fix this in every situation right away. A lot of times you will have to save the level, reload the level, and then it'll correct the texture. But in this particular case it worked, but it locked up. Nothing ever goes the way it's supposed to when you make these kinds of videos. It's probably better that you see the errors, because they happen. Even when you halfway know what you're doing, things still go wrong. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I can't think of nothing else. I think I pretty much covered everything that I wanted to. Now these are just talking about track assets, DAEs. This is not the same thing as transferring terrain paints or transferring decals from one level to the other. This is entirely only talking about DAEs, track DAEs.